Greetings, friends. Oz here from planetOZ, and I've been away for a little bit, so anything new going on Earth? Ha! We know it's mass hysteria down there, but the whole galaxy is rooting for you guys, and you are going to be just fine. Meanwhile, on planetOZ, you might notice that I've got a bit of a different setup here, and I'm still going to be making the same kind of films that I have been making up until this point that are kind of short form with animation and all of that stuff. But on some topics, on some material, on some occasions, it just seems like I needed another format where we could go more in depth, we could go longer, and so I'm going to be doing some of these as well in this style. And so I don't know, it's just something different. It's the way that I consume content. Sometimes I want to watch something short that pops with some animation, and sometimes I want to hear somebody really dive into something and go deep with it. So that's what this new format is about. And we are going to kick it off with the first film in this style, which is looking at the many realms of consciousness. planetOZ. What follows is an integration of esoteric topics as interpreted through the lens of planetOZ. As with all things, it is placed before your wisdom to be made with what you wish. Okay, the many realms of consciousness. What are we talking about here? Well, this is kind of a esoteric thought exercise in how to visualize what we are talking about when we hear people say, oh, well, you know, the reality that we live in is a reflection of something else, or we're living in a hologram, or we're living in a simulation, or all of these things. This relates to these realms of consciousness that could also be thought of as layers, or stacks, kind of like this Russian stacking doll idea here, where one stacks inside the other, and so we're going to kind of dive deep into this and see what this all looks like, starting from the beginning, which is what is typically described as the primordial layer. So there is this primordial concept of consciousness, which would be the beginning, before there is anything, before the awareness has any specificity or individuation. It's this point in time, theoretical, it's all theoretical, but it's this idea that before there was anything, so to speak, there was everything. The consciousness, the primordial mind, so to speak, was everywhere and everything at all times. And essentially, if you were to visualize it, I've got this image here just to kind of represent the concept of a universe in perfect balance, so to speak. It's just perfectly even, perfectly balanced, and perfectly safe, perfectly secure, perfectly calm, perfectly peaceful, perfectly harmonious. But the question is, would you want peace and harmoniousness and perfect balance all the time, all your life? I mean, imagine if you were living this way as in our everyday lives, if you were kind of going about this as a person and you were imagining this as a person, you would be basically at rest in this state. And that's fine. Sometimes you want to be at rest. But what happens if you desire motion? What happens if you desire some excitement or some adventure or some experience? Well, theoretically, that would have been the scenario that the primordial consciousness would have found itself in after presumably untold eons of being at rest. And essentially you can depict the state of a universe in motion with the yin-yang. So essentially the decision to move from this primordial state of rest into motion is how the universe begins. So that's the bottom layer, the primordial layer. Okay, so in order to understand how the primordial layer of consciousness, or the primordial realm, evolves into the next layer, it's worth talking about this really cool concept in quantum physics called collapsing the wave function. And this video that's rolling behind me, I'll link it in the description. This is an animation that's all about the double slit experiment. And so this is an experiment that deals with this concept of collapsing the wave function. And I'll just briefly discuss what it is and what they were looking for. Basically, they were trying to figure out whether or not a particle behaves as a wave or as like kind of a little point, like a little dot or a little ball. And so they were throwing these particles through these two slits and seeing what would happen when they hit this surface beyond, and they were puzzled because they weren't getting a consistent result as to whether or not it was in fact behaving like a wave or behaving like a particle. And one of the things that they noticed was that a key factor and how it behaved seemed to be whether or not they were observing it. So that sounds weird and it sounds woo-woo, and that's exactly what the quantum physicists were thinking when they first discovered this. This can't be right. It seems as if when we observe it, it behaves a certain way and it behaves differently when we don't. And they tried all kinds of tricks. I mean, this experiment has been done and redone by many people many times, and they've tried to hide their intentions on notes and refrigerators, and they've done all kinds of things to try to hide from the fact of their intention to observe the result, and it just doesn't seem to be escapable that ultimately the intention to observe, in other words, the consciousness of the physicist performing the experiments were influencing the results of the experiment. The consciousness seemed to be inextricably interwoven with the particles and the collapse of the wave function. So this video is really worth checking out to understand the double slit experiment, and that gets us into our next realm. Okay, so the double slit experiment shows us how a consciousness can collapse the waveform into a particle. And that is an excellent correlation, or perhaps exactly what happened when the original layer, the primordial, what it's referred to, the primordial state of reality before becoming anything, was just infinite consciousness. So that's kind of equates to almost like an infinite waveform. It's an endless sea, an endless expanse of everything. And so at such a moment as this consciousness decides to have some experience, observe something, engage with something, it needs to basically collapse its own wave function. And since it is one single incredible giant consciousness, it can do that. It just decides to do that, and in doing so, collapses itself down to a singularity, a single point of view. So if we look at this is So this would be the singularity here, and as soon as the consciousness that has been so vast for so long collapses down to a singularity, the first thing that singularity is going to do, which is true to the nature of any consciousness, it's going to expand. It's going to immediately try to expand as fast and as large as possible. Just moments before, this point was everything, and it was everywhere. And so just like that, it is reduced down to a singularity, and so immediately it sets about attempting to return to what it was before. So the consciousness begins to explode outward, expanding, and it's basically what it's expanding outward through or into, for lack of a better term, is simply a vast, endless expanse, infinite expanse of non-consciousness. I don't really have a better way to describe that. I'm not exactly sure what we would call it, but it's a consciousness expanding in a non-consciousness. So basically, you could think of it like almost like a Big Bang, except right now it's just consciousness and non-consciousness. So I gave it this term. A friend of mine calls the Big Bang the Big Bam for some reason, but I really like it. So I just thought, this thing needs a name. It's the Big Bam. So consciousness, singularity, instant expansion, bam. Okay, so what I just described there is often referred to as the consciousness individuating itself. So it went from the primordial unindividuated state, and it created an individuation, and then it started expanding. And since this realm of consciousness and non-consciousness is a non-physical space, this consciousness can expand infinitely and incredibly fast. And not only can it infinitely expand and expand incredibly fast, but as it's expanding, it can also create additional individuations. So each time it creates another individuation, that individuation is going to do the exact same thing. As soon as it's created as a singularity, it's going to start to expand as fast as it can, infinitely. Again, this is not a physical place where there is a limitation to how big it can get. The consciousness can grow infinite in size, so the one individuation that was on its way to infinite size created another one that is also on its way to the same thing, and then you've got a third one going, and so on. There is really no limit to how many individuations of this consciousness there can be, and each individuation could have the potential to grow infinite in size because all of this is taking place in an infinite realm. As soon as we have multiple consciousnesses all flying around and expanding and interacting, we can start to see some other things happen where perhaps different individuations can be imagining the same thing. They might be able to agree upon something, so to speak. Or maybe the imaginings of one and the imaginings of another could conflict, and it could create an interference pattern of sorts. But all of this is going according to the design. It's going according to the plan, because the idea was to go from a primordial state of having nothing to reflect on, nothing to observe, nothing to interact with, to having things to reflect on and observe and interact with. So the way that this interaction and observance of things first starts to materialize, according to this theory, is when these different individuations of consciousness start interacting with each other, agreeing on things to stabilize an idea, perhaps, or conflicting to swirl around and tangle with each other. And when this happens, it basically creates a disturbance pattern. It creates distortion, so to speak. So instead of having each one of these individuations just infinitely and cleanly and smoothly traveling, they interact and they kind of engage and swirl and spiral and do all that cool stuff that you would want to see if you went from a state of being at rest to the state of being in motion. Okay, so we talked about how the primordial realm collapses to a singularity and then expands to become the realm of consciousness and non-consciousness. And next we're going to talk about how that evolves into the realm of light and dark. And each of these layers, as you'll see as we go on and we're talking, serve as a scaffolding for the next layer above them. So from consciousness, we are going into the realm of light and dark. And one thing to note about this is that when we're talking about consciousness expanding in a realm of non-consciousness, this is happening at an incredible speed. This would be much, much faster than the speed of light. So we typically think about the material, the speed of light being the fastest thing that we know of or can observe in our material universe, but this realm of consciousness and non-consciousness is happening underneath the layer of light and dark. So just as an example, if you were to think about, say you were to imagine the sun and imagine the earth. And so you think about the sun and you think about the earth, it only takes a split second to picture these two things, but it actually takes about a little over 8 minutes for light to travel from the sun to the earth. So certainly the light traveling through the darkness is happening at the speed of light, but this is a slower speed than consciousness can move at. So we would presume then that in the realm of consciousness and non-consciousness, and that particular layer, that at this layer there is probably a lot more stuff, a lot more things imagined, a lot more that exists in the realm of consciousness that is simply too fast. It's in metaphysical speak, it's vibrating. The vibration of consciousness is faster than light. So as the consciousness is vibrating so fast, not all of it is going to make it to the next realm because it's just going to be too fast. So this realm of light and dark is capturing that of the consciousness realm that is moving slow enough, or we should say vibrating at a slow enough speed to render in the form of light and dark. Okay, so earlier I was talking about something I cleverly called the Big Bam, where a singularity of consciousness expands infinitely in a realm of non-consciousness. And so if we're imagining how that would manifest a layer above it, if that is serving as the scaffold to support the layer above it, what does the layer above it look like? Well, in this case, we'd be talking about the Big Bang. So then those aspects of consciousness that are moving slow enough in that process to render as light and darkness would take the shape of the singularity representing as a point of light, and then this point of light expands into what is manifest as the state of non-consciousness, is then manifest in this realm as darkness, or the void that we know of outer space, or as we know it to be now, basically it is pure concentrated energy, just like a sea of energy. So space isn't nothing, it's energy, and that dark void of energy is the manifestation of non-consciousness, while the singularity of light that expands seemingly infinitely, or so it would seem at the beginning, is the Big Bang. That is the singularity, that is the consciousness, collapsed wave expanding from there. Okay, so now we're getting closer to the desired result of this infinite primordial consciousness, the original experiment in moving from a state of rest to a state of motion, and going from this to this, and ultimately this sort of takes the shape, as you could imagine, like the cream being poured into the coffee. And so you can see here it's kind of like the coffee itself in its clean default state is perfect, the cream is perfect, and once they mix and settle together, that state will be perfect. But in between, there is another perfect state of change and constant exploration of itself. The cream and the coffee kind of chaotically sorting through each other. And as they do, you can see what essentially is a disturbance pattern, a distortion. This area of chaos as they are colliding and interacting and sorting through, it swirls and it spirals, and that is essentially the same thing that is happening when different individuated consciousnesses in a realm of consciousness and non-consciousness, as they interact, they create this distortion pattern, this disturbance that is manifest in the realm of light and dark as the light and the darkness churning against each other, and it all starts to take the shape of something that looks kind of like this. Okay, so in order to talk about how this realm of light and darkness and the void of energy and that interaction is going to manifest as our material realm, it's worth talking about something called cymatics, which is really cool. If you haven't checked out cymatics, it's there's a lot of videos here. I'll put some up to show what's happening here, and in the whole kind of world of cymatics and these experiments that people do. It essentially involves taking sound waves, as they're using in this case. It's taking vibration, and you are hammering a surface with this vibration, and the vibration will be set to a particular frequency. So you'll set a particular hertz value or something like that, and then you hammer this material, and as you can see, they're sprinkling some sand on it, and as they tune it to different frequencies of sound, you can see how the sand is following the vibration, and it's taking form in these shapes. And as the sounds that they are using increase in frequency, in other words, as you vibrate faster with a faster frequency, the patterns that are generated become more and more complex. They get really cool. And so it's cool to look at this, and it's a good visual for what we're going to talk about next, because what you can see when people do these cymatic experiments is that the sand, one might expect that vibration would just sort of collide in a crazy cloud, and it's just the sand would go all over the place. But that's not actually what happens. You can see that, like, the sand, the vibration, these vibrations are colliding with each other, and as they collide and intermix, they form these interference patterns that stabilize into channels, so to speak, and the sand falls into those channels and takes shape in these organized and interesting patterns. Here is another cymatics clip where you can see they've got this liquid, and they are hitting it with the vibrations in the same way, but in this one you can see that it's actually shaping the liquid in 3D, in 3 dimensions. So if you just look at this at a glance and you don't really know what's going on, you would think that this thing was alive. It looks like it takes living form, and that is key. That is key. That the material appears to us to be that thing that is alive. But actually what is happening is what we are seeing here is the result of the underlying vibration. So when I earlier used this term scaffolding and was talking about how each layer that we're talking about here, each realm is acting as a scaffold for the next one, this is a great key illustration of that, in that the vibration, the sound waves are creating the scaffold, so to speak, with their interference pattern, and the material is rendering that. And just for fun, you got one more here. I really like what this guy did with, this guy's got water coming out of some sort of just a drain spout thing there, and as he changes the sound waves that he's blitzing this water stream with, you can see it's forming shapes seemingly magically in midair. Super cool stuff. Okay, so let me reiterate here. This is all theoretical. We're trying to solve puzzles. We're trying to unpack this. We're trying to figure out how this whole realm works. So we talked about the primordial realm, the primordial layer, collapse the wave function, consciousness, non-consciousness, light and darkness, and then what's stacking upon that would be the realm of matter, or the material world as we know it. So in the last example with the liquid, you could see how it was taking the shape, the matter was being formed by the underlying vibration. So the idea is that in the realm of light and darkness, it is that realm is serving as the scaffold. The vibration of what happens there is rendering the matter and the material world, the material universe as we know it, being born out of the underlying layer that is light. So to bring this all together, you've got over here, you've got a gorgeous man imagining things. He's imagining right here this frog, but when we're thinking and we're imagining, we can do that at 1,000,000 miles a second, So there could be all kinds of imagery, all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of concepts, all kinds of thinking that this consciousness can do. And that needs to be slowed down. That vibration has to slow down and stabilize. And so if that vibration can slow down and stabilize, then you can effectively have it serve as the scaffold to create, in the realm of light and darkness, what we would, I guess, just consider a hologram, like a hologram of the frog. And this is the result of the interference pattern, the slowing down of the consciousness interacting with consciousness to make that form, gives us the light form. And then if we can slow that down enough, if we can have that vibrate slowly enough, we will end up with the result that we see in our material world of the frog made of flesh and bone, jumping around, living its life, having its existence, all part of this grand experiment in consciousness. So one of the things that I find fun about this whole concept and this theoretical way of thinking about these realms of consciousness, and each serving as a scaffold for the one above it, is that if you could imagine that the thoughts of a consciousness would become this realm of light that would then become material, and each one of these realms would have less stuff than the one before, because each one is moving faster than the one above it and the one in which it is nested. So you could imagine that, like, if the consciousness is moving too fast for the light, that means there's going to be plenty of things rendered in the imagination, in the consciousness, that don't manifest in the light and darkness. And then from there, in the realm of light and darkness, there's going to be tons of things that exist in that realm that are moving too fast to render in the physical. So in a sense, this could be an explanation for what we know of as the astral, and the astral realm, and astral projecting, and how that is described, and what people describe seeing there. It essentially, in a lot of metaphysical and spiritual texts and descriptions, it's essentially a realm of light. It's a realm of stuff. It has agreement. It has buildings and structures and temples and libraries and, according to people who have been there, all of this stuff that exists in this realm of light, as well as, we could presume, everything that we are able to see and observe in our material realm. Because again, our material realm is slower than the realm of light and darkness. So it would make sense that our material realm would not have anything that doesn't exist in the realm of light and dark, because we are slower. We are a result. We are a reflection of what is going on. So there isn't more stuff here than there is there. There's less stuff here, because here we only see what is vibrating slowly enough, what has slowed down enough to appear here. Meanwhile, in the realm of light and dark, there are many other things that are vibrating too fast for us to perceive. And so that might explain how we have supposedly this magical astral realm where there are dragons and such. Okay, so I'm not really sure if this theoretical model unlocks some great secret of the universe, but I am reminded of the words of Nikola Tesla, who said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." And we just did that.